Welcome, everybody. I've got just about 7 here on the East Coast, and I know Zach's joining us from Sacramento. Is that right?
So, yeah, just Cameron Park, technically about half hour, 45 minutes east of Sacramento. Yes.
Wonderful. And I know it's Memorial Day weekend, so there are a lot of people on the road out of town. Um, was also, if I'm not mistaken, the East-West game at the Hall of Fame this weekend at Doubleday Field. And I know a few people who went. Um,
Yeah, I just got back.
so
Oh, that's super cool.
yeah, I
I need
saw
to go
some photos. It looked pretty amazing. Since you
I
guys were
went to Dublin.
talking a few seconds ago about the convention in Baltimore, um, I think for those who are interested in going to Minneapolis in August, I think the price goes up sometime pretty soon.
I
So
think it's June 7th.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
so
like
if you are going, and you want to save a few bucks, I would sign up now. It's about 80 some degrees here in Maryland. My wife and I took a drive to the Eastern Shore today, and did sort of a winery tour, um, and got back about an hour and a half ago. The next event, let me think here, since we're at the end of May already, I guess is June 5th, and that's our Peeps at the Peeb uh, event for people who like to come in person. I'll send a reminder around on that. That'll be on Wednesday, June 5th. For those of you in the Baltimore area, I don't know if anybody on here aside from Jeff and myself are, at the Babe Ruth Museum every month now, they're doing signings. It's Anaheim Autographs is the name of the company, and they are all former Orioles. Last month or this month was Scott McGregor, and then I think next month is Eric Davis and somebody else. And then some of the bigger names are coming in the year. I know Buck Showalter's on the list. Brandon Hyde, current manager of the year. So if you're on the Babe Ruth Museum mailing list, make sure to pay attention to that, because hopefully it brings a few more bodies through the doors this summer. The Orioles won today, so we took 4 straight from the White Sox, which is not a big accomplishment, but I'll take it. And other administrative things is SABR, and I'm sure Zach knows this as a chapter chairman. Chapter reports are due to headquarters in the next week, so ours will be the Baltimore chapter will be in on time. David Stinson pretty much did 90% of it, so I got to tweak a few things, and we'll be golden and in the running for all the awards. So Boston's in town tomorrow. I don't know if anybody, Jeff, you're coming.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go to the game.
The weather doesn't look too good.
No, it doesn't. So, but I live a mile away, so it's not a big loss. I don't have to go. So that's about it for now. Obviously, we're recording this. I know Zach's done the rounds with some of the other chapters, so I'm glad he finally got to us here on the East Coast, since we're pretty big, we're pretty active, and we're pretty hard to get a time slot in, and we're booked through the end of July. And then I have a lot of August and September already filled up. So people sort of chomp at the bit, which is a good thing. Better to be in demand and be cast aside. So Zach, welcome. Hopefully I'll see you in person in Minneapolis. And I don't know if you have a presentation, but I gave you rights. So if you have a slideshow or anything, you should be able to do it, no problem. So
Awesome.
take it away.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. I do have a slideshow. I'll go ahead and start sharing that right now. All right.
Yep.
So everybody should be looking at the cover of my book and just the title and my name and everything, correct?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So thank you very much for having me, Peter, and the rest of the group. My name is Zak Ford. I'm here to talk about my book called Up, Ballplayers Remember Becoming Major Leaguers. First, a little bit about me. I am chair of the Dusty Baker Sacramento SABR chapter. I also am very interested in the old Pacific Coast League that was the primary source of baseball, or high quality baseball, prior to the Giants and Dodgers arrival in 1958 on the West Coast. And that's because my great uncle used to play in the old league. So a few things that would have inspired me to put together this book. My favorite book, baseball book, is The Glory of Their Times. I think that's probably not a unique answer for a lot of baseball fans, but what really gravitated me towards that particular book was that although a lot of those ball players were a century older than me, Ritter presented their first person stories in a way that I felt connected to them as their human interest stories as human beings. So I've always kind of had an interest in getting information, getting stories from that first person narrative perspective. And that's how the format of Called Up is. Like all of us, I dreamed of becoming a Major League Baseball player. However, I will admit I struggled to hit around 200 in Little League. So if you struggle to hit around 200 in Little League, you probably should choose writing. I'm all for, trying to, pursue your goals, but I saw the writing on the wall very early. So decided to pursue baseball research and writing in my teen years. And as I had referenced earlier, my great uncle was a professional baseball player in the 30s through 50s, and was actually a phantom major leaguer in 1946 with both the Boston Red Sox and Boston Braves. Phantom major leaguer, meaning that he was on a major league roster, but did not get in any games. He was considered a big prospect in the Pacific Coast League in the 30s. He was actually bought in the same deal as Dominic DiMaggio after the 1939 season. But World War II happened, came back after the war in 1946, made the team out of spring training, but the Red Sox had a great year that season. At the very beginning, got off to a hot start in the services of a near 32-year-old rookie with no major league service time, who had spent a good portion of the last few years in Europe were not needed. So we got released after a few weeks, got picked up by the Boston Braves, was with them for about another week or two. Same thing happened. Got released without getting into a game, never got back to the major leagues. I was always kind of interested in his experience with the in the major leagues those last few weeks. But I did know that there was a pretty large sense of disappointment that he wasn't considered an official major leaguer because he didn't get into a game. Didn't get around to asking him those questions. But he's definitely one of the big inspirations behind this book project. Here's a few photos of me. You could tell just looking at this Little League photo that I was not a very intimidating Little League hitter. Here's me as a right-handed Will Clark in 1989 for Halloween. And then this is my uncle here in a collage of some of the photos of him and I, and photos related to my close relationship with him. So a little bit about the book. So the book is a collection of 109 first-person player stories. They're all original interviews. And what I tried to do was capture the feelings and emotions of becoming a Major League Baseball player. What you can't capture from just reading a box score or looking at Baseball Reference. The behind the scenes of how they got the news. What was the orientation process like? Who were some of the first people they called? What it felt like when they took the mound, when they ran out to the mound that first time or stepped in the batter's box? What was going through their heads? Something that can't be captured, by looking at that box score or looking at the game history on Baseball Reference. So player debuts range from 1961 all the way up to 2018. So the first player in this book is Sudden Sam McDowell, who came up with the 1961 Indians at the age of 18 years old. The most recent player came up 2018 with the St. Louis Cardinals, Patrick Wisdom, who's currently with the Chicago Cubs. And Major League service time ranges from 2 days to over 2 decades. So I hadn't planned on having any other, phantom major leaguers referenced in there. There was one player that reached out to me that had a story that was just too good not to include. He had 2 days Major League service time, no game. And then on the flip side, I have Jerry Royce in there. Jerry Royce spent over 2 decades in the big leagues, 22 years. So quite a diverse amount of Major League experience amongst that collection of 109 players. I debated, how to sort this book out. Ultimately, I decided to do it by debut order. I have 4 time frame sections throughout the book. And what's kind of nice about having it in that debut order is you're able to see common themes that happen in baseball throughout those particular time frames. What was going on in the world, what was going on that impacted baseball. So I got 60s and 70s, 80s, 90s, and then since 2000. Nearly all teams are represented. When all was said and done, I don't think I got releases from players I interviewed with the Diamondbacks and the Astros, but all other 28 teams have at least one player featured in the book. So a little bit more about the time frame sections, why I decided to do that. Here are, some things that impacted roster changes, impacted call-ups during those particular eras. In the 60s and 70s, obviously it was, there were decades of expansion. Baseball went from 16 to 26 teams. Obviously that impacted number of Major League Baseball players. Many minor leagues disbanded during that particular time frame. There's an amateur draft. It hadn't been around since before, prior to that. Labor relations also changed a little bit. You had, free agency in the mid to late 70s introduced. So as a result, you would have, other players that needed to fill some of the spots of the players that decided to go elsewhere. 17 players from the 60s and 70s are represented in the book. 1980s, what does that impact some of the call-ups in that decade? There are some players that were impacted by the 1981 strike for their call-ups. In the 80s too, it obviously dates back, a little bit before the 80s, but the 80s really when you started using more relief pitching. So teams would start to staff to have their rosters filled with more pitching. And then also the evolution of the role of the closer changed dramatically in the 80s as well. And then there's, for a period of a few years in the mid to late 80s, rosters were cut from 25 to 24 players, which obviously limited the number of call-ups as well. 15 players are represented from the 1980s. 1990s, more expansion, more labor issues. Some players in the book were impacted by the lockout in 1990 and then also the 1994 strike. Obviously, there are no September call-ups in 1994, which provided some challenges. But and then some of those players that probably would have got call-ups in September of 1994, which weren't able to, obviously, talked about how their experiences were at the beginning of the 1995 season. A lot of changes to the disabled list, too, in the 1990s, which impacted the ups and downs of players and roster changes throughout the 90s. The 90s is the 90s. They are the time frame. It is the time frame in the book that has the largest amount of representation of players, which is 42. Since 2000, obviously statistical analysis has been around for considerably more than since just 2000, but really over the last generation, there's been more of an emphasis put on that and how players are called up, sent down, moved around, etc. Minor leagues have been restructured a lot over the last 20 years or so. Also, considerably more changes to the disabled list, now called the injured list, which changed the frequency of players going up and down. I don't have this limited to a particular time frame, but obviously the rise in international talent throughout that whole time has impacted roster changes as well. 35 players are in the book that started their careers, major league careers, from the beginning of 2000 and on. All right, so I gave you a little bit of information about the book, time frame sections, me. A little bit about the stories. So as I referenced, a collection of first-person human interest stories. And the goal was to, as I had referenced earlier, obtain what can't be obtained from reading a box score or baseball reference, the feelings and emotions of becoming a Major League Baseball player, of reaching that goal that all of us had when we were children. In fact, shoot, I'm 45 years old. I haven't played in a baseball game in almost 30 years. I still every once in a while have that dream. Obviously, it's not going to happen, but I think it's natural that we all had that dream at one time or another. The first question that I asked players that I interviewed was, when did you first realize you had the talent to become a Major League Baseball player? Now, I didn't ask that question because I wanted them to answer when I was a senior in high school, or when I was a junior in college, or when I reached AA. Now, some of the players did respond in that way, but when they responded in that way, it also sparked memories of different mentors, different coaches, the parents that took them to those games back and forth throughout their journey. So when I started asking about their call up, a lot of the people that they referenced at that from those earlier years then reappeared. Those are the people that they called when they got the news. Those are the people that were in attendance when they made their Major League debut. It just kind of helped with the continuity and how the story would evolve, and it sparked those memories, which helped some of the follow-up questions later on in the interviews. These are first-person narratives that have only been edited minimally from the interview transcripts. So, there may be some grammar slip-ups. I wanted it to read like spoken word. So you're going to have, some players that may say going or going, or, him and me and him. Those types of things I wanted to keep reflected in their first-person narratives to make them authentic to where it sounds. When you're reading it, I wanted it to make it sound like you're actually hearing it, as far as spoken word goes. So if, a ball player had, maybe referenced, you know, um, I pitched 5 or 6 innings, or I entered in the 4th or 5th, and I was able to find out specifically what it is, I would make those corrections, obviously. But for the most part, these are going to be the words of the players. I would rearrange, if I had a follow-up question to make sure it was in chronological order, I'd move it around like that. But these are the words of the players. So I wanted them, like I said, to read like spoken word. All right, so I told you a little bit about the book, give you an overview. I'm going to go ahead and share 3 or 4 stories, and then I'll have some Q&A time for you guys. First story, a favorite of a lot of SABR folks, and that's the story of Bobby Grich. Now, Bobby Grich comes up 1970. He's playing with the Rochester Red Wings, and he's just having an incredible year. If I want to say, I think he was batting in front of Don Baylor that year. They just were stacked. And obviously the Orioles were stacked at a major league level at that time too. But he gets called into the office by Cal Ripken Sr. Cal Ripken Sr., a heavy chain smoker, says he takes a big puff of his Camel cigarettes, blows a smoke ring in the air, and says, "Hey, Bobby, you're going to Baltimore tomorrow." So Bobby goes to Baltimore. He shows up at Memorial Stadium, and he's walking in the locker room, and he sees a door that says manager's office. It's cracked open just a little bit. And he peeks his head in there, and he sees that Earl Weaver is in there. So he taps on the door, opens it up, and says, "Hi, my name is Bobby Grich. I'm here to report for my first day in the big leagues." And we know Earl Weaver was a very warm and fuzzy guy, and as a result, he says, "Okay, do you have anything else to tell me?" That's it. He didn't get up out of his chair to shake Bobby Grich's hand, tell him congratulations, give him an orientation. He just said, "All right, anything else? Go on your way." So Bobby Grich a little bit taken back by that, but that's just the way Earl Weaver was. And, things ended up working out okay. Obviously, Bobby Grich is a member of the Orioles Team Hall of Fame. Then ultimately the Angels as well. It was just kind of a unique, uncomfortable introduction to Earl Weaver at a major league level. After that, he takes a bus from Memorial Stadium to Washington to play the Senators. The guy pitching for the Senators that day is a guy by the name of Casey Cox. Unfortunately, he just recently passed. But Casey Cox had actually attended the same high school as Bobby Grich in California. Now, Casey Cox was a few years older than Bobby, but to face somebody who went to your high school a few years prior to you, 3,000 miles away is a pretty unique experience. He doesn't have that great of a game. He goes 0 for 3 with a walk. The next day, he walks in the locker room, and there's a cake waiting for him in the center of the locker room that says, "Welcome to Baltimore, Bobby." All right, so the rest of this story I'm going to read to you. These are Bobby Grich's words regarding that cake that is found. Frank Robinson and all the other guys come in. Frank says, "Who bakes a cake for somebody who gets a walk? You didn't do anything last night. You got a walk. What's this cake all about?" He was giving you a bad time, I said, "Well, come on in, guys. Let's each have a piece of this cake." Pete Richard took a piece of the cake and then took a bite. He goes, "Wait a minute. That's sour cream icing. Dude, smell that. That's not right." I started to smell it, and he goes, "No, put your nose down closer into it." I heard somebody kind of giggle. I knew right then and there they were going to throw my face down in that cake if I got close enough. It was a total setup. My instincts picked up on it. I jumped away. He tried to push me down. I think the tip of my nose may have hit the cake, but that was it. So he didn't get me. That was the first time I'd seen that prank pulled. Anytime we had a rookie called up from there on out, I was in on the joke. We got a bunch of rookies after that. They would go over, smell the cake, and somebody would come from behind and slam their face into it. It was pretty funny. That's Bobby Grich's orientation to the big leagues. All right, I'm going to skip up quite a bit, share a national story. The story of Jason Bergman came up 2005 with the Nationals. He's 11th round pick by the Montreal Expos in 2002. Fairly regular, fairly quick rise to the big leagues. But what makes his story unique is his 2004 season in the Florida State League was actually cut short because of a hurricane. Well, the following year, he's in New Orleans at the end of the 2005 season. We know what happens there. Katrina, all right? He gets called up during Hurricane Katrina. So he gets the call. He actually kind of had a pause for that particular season. He gets a call from his manager, says, "Hey, you needed to get to the airport and you're going to get called up." He was anticipating when he saw the call from the manager that the manager was going to provide him more information on, what's the schedule looking like, next week. But no, it was, "You're going to the big leagues." Well, he misses his flight from New Orleans. All right. So he gets a call, he calls and, the traveling secretary or whatnot says, "Hey, I missed this flight. I'm not going to be able to make this flight." So they get him a flight from Baton Rouge. He goes all the way to Baton Rouge. I think he has like 3 hours to get there. It takes him like 2.5. He barely makes the flight. So he's getting there. He gets there, and his girlfriend had actually driven him, to try and go to the New Orleans airport. That didn't work out. Then tries to take him over to the Baton Rouge. Obviously, his girlfriend cannot get back into New Orleans after that because everybody's trying to get out. All right. So they end up flying to Atlanta. She ended up staying in Atlanta for 24 hours. They had one game up in Washington. They said, "Okay, we're going to meet you. I'll meet you in 24 hours. He goes up to Washington, and he's surprised by actually getting into a game that first night. Not only does he get into a game, he relieves Mike Stanton, who's a player that he had seen, grown up watching, or at least, in his teen years. And he comes in to relieve Mike Stanton with the bases loaded. He gives up a hit. Things don't go quite well, but not horribly. So he gets out of the inning, comes back, and they don't do a switch. He ends up actually batting in the bottom of the eighth. Now, keep in mind, pitchers, this is before universal DH, but in the minor leagues, pitchers don't hit. In the college, they don't hit. In high school, oftentimes they don't hit unless they're playing, other particular positions those particular days. So it's his first time picking a bat in probably a few years at least. But he's able to make contact. He grounds out, if I recall. Doesn't embarrass himself, but then he has to go back out for the ninth as well, and he strikes out the side. All right, but I'm going to go ahead and share a few different stories or a few different insights from Jason Bergman's journey from, when he's in that car with his girlfriend trying to get to Washington as soon as possible. This is when he's in traffic. I'm sitting there in the car looking at my girlfriend, and I'm like, what if this hurricane screws up my chances of going to the major leagues? I'm in New Orleans. I can't get to the airport, and they need a guy tomorrow. They could just call a guy from Harrisburg, and he'd drive down in no time. That was running through my head. Obviously, the hurricane was a major issue because all of our stuff was there. Her family was there, everything else. I get a call back that says, get to Baton Rouge. We've got a flight for you at 5:30. We have 3 hours to get to Baton Rouge. It takes about 2.5. I barely made the flight. Then I had a decision to make. My girlfriend was driving me to the airport, but she obviously couldn't get back to be with her family because all the roads had closed off access due to the hurricane. I'm sitting there at the gate, and I'm like, well, how much does it cost for her to fly with me? They named their price, and I decided at that point, not just in my baseball life, but with my future marriage, come with me. Let's do this together. We both flew to Atlanta. I had a connection to DC, and she stayed. Team was only going to be in DC for 1 day and then head over to Atlanta. So I said, I'll meet you in 24 hours. It was the most amazing and worst day ever. We lost all of our stuff because of the flooding, but I got to realize my dream of going to the big leagues. That's Jason Bergman's call-up story. All right. Another exciting one. Ryan Rowland-Smith, 2007 Mariners. He signed as an undrafted free agent out of Australia in 2000. All right, so you're doing the math there. 2000, doesn't make his major league debut until 2007, so he's put in some time, right? During this time, he's represented Australia 3 times in the World Baseball Classic and also in the 2004 Summer Olympics. During this time, also, he gets Rule 5 picked by the Twins. Twins bring him to spring training in 2004, decide not to keep him. He gets returned to the Mariners at the end of that 2005 spring training. So he has a pretty decent year, 2005. 2006 is really kind of a changing year for him. He has a coach on his team in 2006, which becomes an Arizona Fall League coach that fall. Now, he wasn't originally tapped to go to the Arizona Fall League, but that coach really advocated for him. So he ends up going to Arizona Fall League, has a good year, carries on into the beginning of 2007, and he actually gets called up, for a series against the Yankees in May of 2007. A few of the unique things about that: he reports to the Mariners, walks in the clubhouse, finds that his jersey, the name on his jersey is misspelled. So he's like, well, what do I do? Do I let the clubhouse manager know? Do I just go with the misspelled jersey? Ultimately, he tells the clubhouse jersey, he goes out about the jersey, and then he goes out to the bullpen without a jersey for the first half of the game. They bring it out to him a little bit later. He doesn't get into a game at all the entire first call-up with the Yankees. He gets sent back down. About 3 weeks later, he gets called back. He goes into Seattle, and it's not just any game in Seattle. It's King Griffey Jr.'s return to Seattle. All right. So I'll share a little bit about his first call up with the Yankees, and then I'll share the unique story that he had connected to King Griffey Jr. All right. So this is about the call up for the Yankees series. Keep in mind, he's focused on the minor league season. He's not paying as much attention to what's going on in the major leagues. All right. He gets the news he's going to get called up the first time. I got outside and Googled who we were playing. We were playing the Yankees. They had a bunch of lefties in their lineup. Jason Giambi, Hideki Matsui, Johnny Damon, and all those guys. I was like, no freaking way. Not the Yankees. Can't I just face Tampa Bay on a Tuesday? I can't handle this. I get 3 days in the big leagues, and I don't pitch. There were a good few weeks where I thought that was going to be my story. I got called up, never pitched. No kid's ever going to believe me. I was freaking out in AAA, and I'm like, don't get hurt. Just please be patient. I was scared I was never going to have a stat line to prove I was a Major League Baseball player. All right. Fast forward about 3 weeks, he gets that call up again. As I referenced, he's going to Seattle, and it's King Griffey Jr.'s return to Seattle as a member of the Reds. I went back up, and the first night we're playing the Reds. King Griffey Jr. was back in town for the first time. Again, no soft landing. I'm like, man, can't we just play somebody who's not very good and make it easy for me? They had a ceremony for Griffey, and the place was packed. We were down 16-1, and I'm like, all right, tonight's my night. This is going to happen. I start getting loose, and they said, you're going to face a lefty. Keep in mind, Ryan Rowland-Smith is also a lefty, and brought in for a specialist role. Well, the 3 lefties in the lineup were Josh Hamilton, Adam Dunn, and King Griffey Jr. They're all all-stars. I just didn't want to face Griffey my first time. I was so nervous. Lo and behold, the first batter I ever faced was King Griffey Jr. Everybody's on their feet. They all want to see him hit a home run. I come in, they're on their feet, but it's not for me. I felt like I hadn't thrown a ball in 2 months. My hand was numb, and all I was thinking was, just throw strikes, do not walk him. You have to remember something. I grew up in Australia in the 90s before the internet. We didn't have access to players, but we had access to guys like King Griffey Jr. because he was on The Simpsons. Here I am thinking, man, this dude was on the freaking Simpsons. People back home even know who he is. I remember I threw my last warm-up pitch and walked around a little on the mound trying to look cool. I'm like, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. Willie Bloomcrest was playing short. He walked over to me and said, hey, man, enjoy it. It's just another hitter. Have some fun. That calmed me down a little bit. I said to myself, just throw strikes. All of a sudden, I had 2 strikes against him. I'm looking at that iconic stance, and I'm like, I'm going to try and snap off the biggest curveball of my life here. I did. He swung right over it. I swear the place booed me. My mom and stepdad had flown over from Australia, but their flight got delayed and they missed the game. When I picked them up, my mom asked, did you pitch? I said, yeah, I did. She was a bit bummed she missed my debut. Then I told her I faced King Griffey Jr., and she said, oh my God. That's Ryan Rowland-Smith's orientation to the big leagues. I got one more story for you, and I'll be happy to take any questions and answers. So Mike Balfour comes up with the Orioles in 2013, actually comes up 3 different times before his single major league game. He's called up in May, goes to Minnesota. It's actually overlapping Mother's Day. The whole family comes out, all that. Doesn't happen. All right. The next month, he gets called up in Tampa. Same exact thing. Family comes out. Big thing. Doesn't happen. He gets sent back down. Well, eventually he gets called back up in September. And they're playing. They're at that time, they're in Tampa as well, but he doesn't get into a game. Now, his parents were at every single game that while he was on the roster. Even those call-ups where he did not get into games. Eventually, he does get into a game. He gets into one single Major League Baseball game at the end of that season. It's against the Red Sox, and it's the last season in the last season series. All right. So these are Mike Belfiore's words. The moment was crazy. I saw it all evolving. I remember Dustin Pedroia being up. They said, get ready. I start throwing bullets as fast as I can. I didn't even realize who was on deck, but it was obviously David Ortiz. I just figured left on left is when I'm coming in. I get the call to run out the gate, and from there, your adrenaline just completely takes over. Your heart's pumping. Running the mound, you're saying, find a way to get out of it. Find a way to get out of this jam. I got deep in the count against Ortiz, and I gave up a homer in the first row, left center. Obviously, I gave up a homer, but I felt like I had also made a good pitch there too. Put a good swing on it, and I have to give him credit. In the moment, I was obviously mad. I thought this is the worst thing that could ever happen. Now, telling buddies and new friends is quite the story to tell. I remember going into the locker room, and obviously I was mad at the time, but a lot of the guys were reminding me, hey, you're officially in the record books now as a big leaguer. Don't worry, congratulations. It was weird. I didn't have a great outing, but everyone was coming up, shaking my hand, and congratulating me. It was a real surreal moment. I remember going out with my family later that night. My parents were at every game I got called up for. It was kind of the same thing, like, I can't believe that you're a Major League Baseball player, that kind of talk. It definitely took me a day or two to step back and realize what I had accomplished. It's a dream you dream about forever, and not many people get that opportunity. That's his story. Pretty exciting. And actually, one of my favorites with 3 different call-ups, one single Major League game, and the first batter is David Ortiz, a future Hall of Famer that hits a home run. Quite a good story. All right. So that's it for call-up stories. Just as an FYI, I'm currently working on a book. Current working title is Next Up, and it's going to be about post-playing career transitions. So I'm hoping that this will give readers a greater understanding of what ball players face when they do hang up their cleats, what that transition is like into normal jobs per se, and also help some ball players with their transitions. I am interviewing a lot of ball players now. Let's keep in mind that a lot of players, I mean, we see, players that get the big contracts, but a lot of the players in called up, a lot of the players that do reach the major leagues aren't there for a huge amount of time. Once you factor in, maybe a half dozen to 10 minor league seasons, maybe 3 or 4 cups of coffee over a few seasons, that's definitely not enough to sustain you for very long after your playing career, if at all. So a lot of players have some pretty substantial challenges, going into the workforce when they're in their late 20s or early 30s. The collage here is that of Casper Wells. He's the first player that I interviewed for the book project. Now enjoying family life and he's working in the insurance industry, and he kind of had a good, a positive spin on, his career after baseball. Is, he kind of realized, that he kind of compares himself, since he spent 10 years in baseball, to, he's 39 now. He's, comparing himself to a normal 29-year-old in the workforce. He kind of figured, he's, working his way up to the big leagues of the working world per se. That's, Casper Wells. I have his sample story on my website as well. So if anybody has any questions or comments or anything at this time, I definitely would love to answer them. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and in the chat, I'll provide you with my email. If you're interested in getting a book, I do have some that I'd be able to provide direct. And then I also will put in the book project's website, where there are multiple links to different ways in which you could purchase the book directly through McFarlane, through Amazon, through Barnes & Noble. There are ebook versions available as well. And then also my personal website. So I'll go ahead. That's in the chat right now. But definitely would be happy to answer any questions that anybody may have at this moment.
Zach, I've got a couple questions. Why 109, and how did you come up with that number?
I actually interviewed 149 players for this book. Originally, when I was reaching out to players, I wanted to have 75 to 100. And after a few months, I had things were rolling pretty well. I updated my goal to 150. Now, I started transcribing stories, and I averaged about 850 words per story. And when I went to SABR 50 in Baltimore, I talked to a few of the publishers. I told them, what my goal was, what the word count was. And I said, I'm looking at, hopefully having 150 in the book. Given the word count, that's probably going to be somewhere around 130,000 to 140,000 words. All the publishers were like, whoa, wait a sec. For this type of book, that's way too much. All right. So I'm like, okay, well, what the hell do I do? Like, I don't want to cut players. So when I got the contract with McFarlane required me to go out and get releases from the players. I hadn't, this is my first book. I was green. I just kind of figured, hey, if we have a verbal agreement's fine with me. Well, obviously a publisher is going to be a little bit more cautious. They wanted to have the signed release. So when all was said and done, McFarlane wanted me to be at 90,000 words. And I was reaching out to players for the releases, and I ended up with 109 back. And I'm doing the math as I'm transcribing some of these stories and putting them into story form. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm going to be at 90,000 words. It's going to be difficult for me to cut it down to 90,000 words. So I reach out to Gary, the great editor over at McFarlane, and I tell him, I'm like, hey, Gary, I don't know, I think I'm going to be, over 90,000. I might be somewhere around 95 or maybe a little more. He's like, all right, well, as long as you're 95, that's fine. I'm not kidding with you, Mike. I ended up, I put my preface and my introduction in a completely separate document. Now I'm doing the word count, so I know I know ballpark of where I'm going to be. I copied and pasted my preface and my introduction into the main book manuscript. I was at 95,000 words exact. I wasn't at 95,010. I wasn't at 94,990. I was at 95,000 exactly, which is almost scary perfect, right? I knew I was going to be somewhere probably within a few hundred words of that, just based on me being cautious of that. But 109 just happened to be literally the very perfect total for the book, and then 95,000 words. That gives you a very long answer to that, but that's
a good answer.
That's really good answer. Story of why that happened. A little weird, right? But that's just, that's how it happened.
Is it very similar to what you're doing now? Your whole process, the post? Like, how are you deciding on those, or do you send like emails to all ex-players, or how does that work?
Yeah. So what I did, for Called Up, obviously Called Up, it's a very positive thing, right? You're talking about basically the highlight of your career for the most part. So I would just reach out. My only criteria was that they had Major League service time. So I just reached out to anybody. And basically what I did was I searched Facebook and Twitter at the time for, it's just like former MLB or former major leaguer or MLB alum or something like that. So what ends up happening, a lot of players would have that in their bio, and then, follow a few, become friends with a few, and then the Facebook and Twitter algorithms start going up, right? So that's how I got all my contacts for book one. Oh, not all of them, I'm sorry. I should say about half to 2/3 were through social media. But for the post-playing careers, a lot of this is much more personal, because some of these guys went through some pretty big struggles trying to find that second identity. It's actually, a lot of people want to connect it to, the financial part of it, which definitely is part of it, a huge aspect, but it's also an identity issue. It's a fulfillment issue. Imagine doing something your entire life. You reach the pinnacle of your career. All of a sudden you're 30 years old, 32 years old, and it's like you're just thrown out, right? And keep in mind, like I said earlier, a lot of these ball players did not make very much money. These are guys that had a few years in the major leagues here, a few years. I mean, Jerry Royce is definitely the exception in this book. So when I decided to reach out for this next post-playing career, what I did was I basically just focused on the players that I already had the relationships with through this book. And I put together kind of a happy spring training card. I figured, Christmas cards get kind of lost in the mail. So I put together a spring training card, about what I was doing and everything like that with a little handwritten note. If you're interested in sharing your post-playing career, I definitely would love to include you. So I already had those established relationships to where if I'm asking a little bit more detail about, okay, well, how did you get the news? When did you kind of realize the writing was on the wall that your playing career was over? What were some of the challenges that you faced? I mean, some of these guys, they went back to wives who they've, found their wives in other relationships who, or their kids were, they had a lot of challenges, and they're trying to find that in any, so luckily I've had a pretty good response that way. It's been all players that I either have relationships with, players that I have relationships with who have reached out to other players about my project who are willing to talk, or players who have come to me. Because of the personal nature of this second book and that it's not necessarily as uplifting per se, I do think it's extremely important, probably more important than the first book. I didn't want to, just reach out, and out of the blue and folks that I didn't have those relationships with and ask those personal questions. So it's right now I've actually interviewed, I believe it's 23 or 24 of the players. These stories will be much longer. The average story in Called Up was about 850 words. The first story for Next Up was 3,200 words. So just doing that math, you're looking at, more like 30 players as opposed to 109. So, for the most part, I've kind of completed my interviews with the exception of kind of targeted players. I definitely would love to have, some, Latin American players, some more African American players, to try and have more of a broad, sampling of stories. And that's kind of like what I'm going after now, is just kind of going to, figure out specifics. And this will include both players that reached the major leagues and those that did not. Those that did not reach the major leagues, if you're, a minor leaguer, I tried generally to try and focus on minor leaguers that had at least maybe 5 years in, to where it wasn't just, they play 1 or 2 years when they're 18 and 19, they go where they actually establish some sort of identity as a professional baseball player with the realistic expectation that they were probably going to evolve on that next level, and it didn't happen. So that's also another, some of those personal stories too from minor league guys that didn't get the call up. So, asking some of those questions as well. It's just been, like I said, this is almost, I almost think if this project is more important, it's definitely not going to be as uplifting. But I think that these stories need to be told because there hasn't really been much out there about it.
Anybody going to be in both?
Yes. I would say probably at least 3/4 of the players that will be in Next Up came from the Called Up relationships.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Because of the relationships you already had. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So you'll be able to, like, if you get both books, you'll be able to kind of see, okay, well, this is them when they reach the major leagues. And then maybe, go over the other book, there's probably going to be at least a 25% chance that they're in the Next Step book as well. And you go, okay, well, what did they do afterwards? Sorry, Karen, what was your?
That's okay. I have a couple questions, short ones. One of them is, did you get to talk to any of the pirates?
Pirates, you said?
Yeah. Pittsburgh
Yes,
Pirates.
there are definitely some pirates in there. Let me see who I have amongst the pirates. I have to look through my my index for let me find Pittsburgh here. I got Chad Hermanson, Jason Kindle, Nick Kingham, Vance Slaw, and Gary Wilson. Nick Kingham actually has a really good story because he spent something like 8 years in the minor leagues, got some pretty severe injuries, and he had a perfect game until about the 7th inning. So his story is one of the better ones in the book as well, and he's a Pittsburgh guy.
Okay, thank you.
And then Vance Law, obviously, Vance Law had some unique tidbits on his story as well, because his dad, obviously, we know was a longtime Pirate as well. So when Vance Law comes up with the 1980 Pirates, some of the players that played with his dad were still on the Pirates, which kind of made the story. I wasn't planning on telling, but this is a funny story about Vance Law. So Vance Law is Mormon, okay? He's LDS, means he doesn't drink, all right? So after his major league debut, Harvey Haddix, who is a coach with the Pirates at that time, comes up to him in the clubhouse. Harvey Haddix was a teammate and friends with Vance's dad, Vern. So Harvey Haddix comes over with a beer and says, hey, congratulations on, your major league debut. And Vance Law looks up at him and says, Harvey, I don't drink. And he goes, I know, I was checking on you. He was checking on him kind of like you're his dad. But yeah, so a couple of pretty good pirate stories.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Zach, which I know you said they were all about 850 words, but was there one that was a little bit longer? And what was your favorite? I know your last story, you liked that one a lot, but is there one that stands out the most at 109?
There are definitely a few. But in all honesty, I was interviewing players for about 3.5 years or so, and I would interview a player and I'd go, wow, this is a great story. This is one of the best I've ever heard. And a week or two later, I'd interview a player and I'd be like, wow, this is a great story. It's one of the best I've ever heard. There are a few that I tend to gravitate to. You referenced the length of the stories. The stories range from about 450 words to I think the longest is about 2,800 words. A few of the stories, admittedly, I'm a Giants fan. So a couple of the stories I, remember, like Jaw Leach. He spent 12 years in the minor leagues before finally getting his cup of coffee in 2001 with the Giants. I remember that. So it was great talking to him about that. One of the stories that I really wanted to have in this book, and fortunately I was able to get it, he was cool, cooperative, was the story of Adam Greenberg. That's one of the larger, longer stories. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with Adam Greenberg's story, I actually have 2 call-up stories for Adam Greenberg in the book. There are three overall players with 2 different call-up stories. I figured if you go at least 5 years between your call-up, I'm going to include at least 2. So Adam Greenberg gets brought up to the Cubs 2005. Very first pitch of his very first at bat against the Marlins, he gets beaned. And it's not just a bad beaning that impacts his baseball career, it impacts his life. He's struggling, trying to get back, all this. It doesn't happen. 2000 and I want to say 12, maybe 13, whatever that year it was that R.A. Dickey ended up winning the Cy Young Award, he was almost unhittable that year. Well, Adam Greenberg gets a 1-day contract to get his 1 major league at bat with the Marlins, which is the team that he was facing. So he's facing R.A. Dickey for his first major league at bat. He strikes out on 3 pitches. He gets a standing ovation because everybody had known about the struggles that he had the last 7 years trying to get back to the major leagues. That was one of my more favorite, stories, and that's probably somewhere around 2,500 words, I would guess. But yeah, I mean, it's there definitely a lot that, and if I flip through the book, I might tell you a few, examples that are great, that I think are great, and then if I flip through the book, and I might decide to hide a few, highlight a few more if you were to ask me, in a month from now or 2 months from now. But those are a few that kind of pop into my head. Just the initial the initial ones. And then obviously as a, growing up as a Giants fan in the 80s, some of the ball players that I was able to talk to that I remember, as a kid, those were definitely some great folks to talk to too. Not always the best stories, but those were some things that stories that I tended to gravitate to just based upon my personal interests.
Anybody else? Speaks for Zach. When did this come out?
It came out towards the end of October.
Okay.
So it has been out for a while. So as I referenced in the chat, I put in my email address that folks would be able to, if they wanted to, reach out to me directly to get a book. Retail's $35. I don't charge shipping. Or they could also go to calledupproject.com. There's a link there for ordering options for McFarlane, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, etc. Indie books too. The link to independent bookstores is on there as well. And then if you want to know a little bit more about me and my writing projects, you can get on my personal website, which is zakford.com. Just remember to spell Zak weird, ZAKFORD. And it gives you a little bit more information about me as well. And I regularly maintain social media accounts where I post, sample stories and relevant stories for both Called Up and my current project, Next Up.
Are you planning to come to Minneapolis?
I will be there. Looking forward to it.
Me too.
Yeah, and that would be an option too. If you want to get the book in Minneapolis, I know I've talked with McFarlane, and we'll have a book signing in Minneapolis as well at the SABR convention.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. All right, guys. I know some people are going out of town or are out of town or on their way back. Here in Maryland, people rush to the beach. It's the unofficial start of summer. So traffic is a nightmare for those going or coming back from Ocean City probably today and tomorrow. So, but that's about it. Obviously, I'm going to send reminders for the next couple events coming up. Zach, thank you very much. I look forward to meeting you in Minneapolis, which is it's almost June, so it's a little over 2 months away.
Yeah, it's about 2.5 months coming up on us quick.
It's August 7th to the 11th. So
yeah.
I'm booked. I'm not staying at the Hyatt, but I'm staying a few blocks away. So much appreciated. You guys, I'm sure I'll see several of you soon. For those of you who like to write for our newsletter, since we are at the end of May, our deadline for the next issue is the end of June. So, because we like to get it out circa the All-Star game, get our 4 issues out a year. So if anybody wants to contribute, reach out to Ruth. And if you need her contact info, just let me know. So have a good weekend, guys. And for those of you who have tomorrow off, enjoy, and see you in about a week and a half at the next event.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
I appreciate the time.